Ever since I was young, I've always wanted to climb Mount Everest. I've had a Fitbit since I was in fifth grade, and I love to walk. But after reading Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer, I can confidently say that is no longer the case. What's going on, MD 305 and Professor Takahashi? And for my book log, I read Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer, and I can fully confirm this is my first time reading this book. I've also never watched a film or documentary about this either, and the book is 333 pages. No, I am not currently on Mount Everest. I'm in Syracuse, which is, to be fair, very snowy at the same time. But my first lesson from this book is to always be present and always be on site when you can. Obviously, that's tough today. A lot of people aren't always available. They have conflicts in their schedule. But I think the reward of being in person and getting to witness things firsthand is so much greater than conducting interviews online and researching things. Krakauer honestly may be an outlier in truly how much detail and how vivid it is, but it's just a masterclass of being present on site, really picturing the scene with vivid, rich detail and dialogue. Audiences, again, don't want to be given boring information, and I think that's on full display in the book. First up, he gives great detail on page 83 when he's talking about the ice fall. He goes very in depth and says he even forgot to be afraid, which I think really attests to the treacherous conditions on the mountain. And then later in the book, there are various examples of this, but he describes the conditions on the mountain once again and saying wind-whipped granules of ice and snow struck the climbers' faces with violent force and made it impossible to see where they're going. Like, you could probably sense it's a sunny day right now, but if this is a blizzard, it would be catastrophic, and I think he illustrates that to perfection. And then my second lesson is to give adequate context when discussing a topic similar to Everest magnitude. So do background research, conduct interviews, and I think he does. Krakauer again does a truly tremendous job of this. He starts off by talking about in 1921, there were British expeditions to Everest, some background there. It really transformed Sherpa culture. And then I wanted to really know coming into the book who before Krakauer really got to the top of Everest. And he goes in detail describing the 1953 Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norway expedition there. They were the first ones to get to the top. And Tenzing was hailed as a hero throughout a couple of Eastern Asian countries, like Eastern Asian countries after this. And I just think it shows for my literacy beat too. I'll be sure to include stats and context to really analyze trends and really picture things over and put things into a broader picture because I think that's really important for contextualizing things. My third lesson from the book, reporting wise, is that follow-up interviews are essential and something I'm definitely going to apply to my beat. When Krakauer was researching his article for Outside Magazine, he said he interviewed as many of the people on Holland Fisher Summit teams as possible. And he always mentions he spoke with people multiple times. Like maybe the first time it was a more general interview, the second time more in depth. He describes that really in detail on page 229. And I think it's important for my beat to have multiple interviews if possible. We talked about in the prerequisite class, JNL 211 specifically, how first interviews can kind of serve as intro interviews at a time. And by talking to your source once, you can then develop a more firm angle and a really concrete idea of what you want to talk about. And then Martin Adams in the book, who's on the summit with Krakauer too, he's very apparently distrustful of reporters, and he denied Krakauer's interview request until late. I believe it was July, and the summit ended in May. Not sure if it's the same year, but it was definitely a while. And then that just leads me to my next point. Be persistent, but at the same time, don't force it. If someone says no, they said no. All right, so the first lesson I have from the very beginning of the book could be a takeaway too. I thought the lead and the hook by Krakauer were truly off the charts. It was excellent. He describes how he went 57 hours. Yes, 57 hours, like 2.5 days basically, with barely any food, and he didn't sleep. He was on the top of the summit, so it really hooks me in. It's a great attention grabber, and as I mentioned before, attention spans nowadays are shorter than ever, and really capturing your audience's attention right away is super, super important. And I think Krakauer does that too. I think Krakauer does an excellent job of it. Something I'm going to try to apply with my literacy Beat too. I'm going to try to describe powerful anecdotes and start with them in my profile, explainer pieces, whatever it is, to really enhance my reporting. All right, so this could really be applicable throughout the entire book, but I think specifically in the middle of the book, Krakauer does an excellent job of really ending chapters. For example, in chapter 13, he ends by talking about how like his main goal of reaching Everest was attained, but at the same time, that was only half of the journey, and the next half of the journey was heading back, so he couldn't even really celebrate. So I thought he really highlighted his feelings very, very well. Remember, I talked about the vivid imagery before. I think that's on full display here on page 189, and then a little bit later on page 203, he honestly he even curses at the end. He's like, we've effing done it. Like the others would be coming into camp soon, but I was safe. Like he starts off by talking about how like they were safe, they finally made it, and then there's a little bit of a section break. Like I think I'm done, and then boom, there's a section break, and then he's like, it'd be multiple hours before I learned that not everything turned out great. And then he talks about well, like how 19 people were like fighting for their lives on the mountain. So I think the way he ends chapters is very, very powerful, and I think that's definitely something that I could work on with my beat. Like I had a story run for the Daily Orange the other day that didn't really have much of a kicker or anything, but I think Krakauer is a great example of why closing a chapter with a powerful anecdote or story is very important. At the end of the book, one of the things I really like and a big takeaway is that reflection is really important. I think Krakauer does a really good job of that. Specifically on page 296, I could really sense the reflection. He says, not even in sleep is there respite. Imagery from the climb and its aftermath continues to permeate my dreams. So it really just shows how absolutely grueling and brutal the expedition does. He really takes time to reflect on that once he's back in the United States, and I really admire that's something I kind of do after I report on a topic and before I truly write on it. I often think like, oh, like how did this go overall? Like kind of assess how it went and things like that. He didn't really like totally assess himself, but like for my beat, I'm definitely gonna really assess myself. I'm definitely gonna really assess myself and go in depth on what I could do better, things like that, and just reflect on the experience. So the main two reasons I think student journalists should definitely read this book is one, because it really gives a good idea of how to approach a very sensitive topic. I think Krakauer, obviously people die on the top of the mountain. There are multiple very dark and scary scenes, but I think between kind of his interviews and talking to people after, I think he does a really solid job of really handling it like a pro and really just going about it, reporting and not getting caught up in the little details. And I think that could be useful for a lot of student journalists getting exposed to like difficult reporting on difficult topics. And then my second one is definitely he admits his mistakes a lot, and I think for a lot of student journalists, like nobody in particular, but I think it's a tendency for like them to like make like small fact errors and things like that. Like at least for me at the Daily Orange, that sometimes happens with me, and I think Krakauer does a really good job of really disclosing that and saying like, oh, this may not be true, this may not be true. And finally, my rating for the book, I'm going to give this a 9.5 out of 10. I'm going to give it a 9 for content. It's a little bit sensitive at times and it gets a little bit dark, but overall it's tremendous. And then 10 out of 10 for style, just a detail. It really, as I keep mentioning, it really hooked me into the story. Like I'm someone I personally don't love to read, but if it's very descriptive and vivid, like Krakauer writes, it really catches my attention and it was great. So overall, definitely recommend it.